Hello and welcome to Sleepy Professor. Tonight we're stepping into the quiet, mysterious world of plants. A place where leaves listen, roots explore, and trees just might be talking behind our backs. It's a slow-motion universe filled with light, chemistry, and clever little tricks that unfold one patient moment at a time. I hope this video isn't too interesting, though. If it does happen to keep you awake, at least you'll be learning something fascinating in the process. Not the worst way to spend a sleepless night. Before we begin, if you enjoy drifting off to the gentle hum of science, Sleepy Professor would be very grateful if you tap the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more sleepy minds find their way here. And while you're settling in, Sleepy Professor would love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Feel free to share it in the comments. It's always wonderful to see how far these quiet little journeys reach. So get cozy, let your shoulders relax. Plants are easy to underestimate. They don't pace or pounce, they don't bark, blink, or scurry off into the underbrush. They just sit there quietly, greenly. But if you take a closer look, really stop and notice, you'll find that plants are not just passive decorations in the background of life. They're astonishingly complex, beautifully structured, and incredibly resourceful. Their bodies, although slow-moving and silent to our eyes, are finely tuned systems built for survival, adaptation, and subtle interaction with the world around them. Let's begin appropriately with the basics. What exactly is a plant made of? More specifically, how does its body function in a world where moving an inch per day is considered quite athletic? To start, plants are made up of three main organs: roots, stems, and leaves. These parts work together in an elegant, interdependent dance of water, nutrients, sunlight, and growth. Though they may seem simple on the outside, each of these parts performs a suite of tasks that keep the plant alive and thriving. Roots are the unsung heroes of the plant world. Hidden underground, they anchor the plant in place, soaking up water and minerals from the soil like an ever-thirsty sponge. But they don't just sit there absorbing, they explore. Roots can sense gravity, moisture gradients, and even physical barriers. They grow toward nutrients and away from toxins, and when they encounter obstacles in the soil, they make choices, branching around rocks, slowing down in compacted earth, or sending signals upward to adjust growth strategies above ground. A single tree, like an old oak or a slender birch, can have a root system that extends outwards far beyond the canopy, sometimes up to 2 or 3 times wider than the tree is tall. That underground architecture is complex, sprawling, and responsive. In some cases, the roots of neighboring plants even fuse together, forming natural grafts that allow them to share resources. And then there's the stem, or more broadly, the shoot system. This is the above-ground structure that includes stems, branches, flowers, and fruit. The stem has a few key roles. It holds up the plant's leaves to the light. It transports fluids and nutrients between the roots and leaves, and in many cases it serves as a storage system, like in the thick water-filled stems of cacti or the carbohydrate-rich stalks of sugarcane. Inside the stem, 2 main transport systems run like biological highways. These are the xylem and the phloem. The xylem carries water and minerals upward from the roots to the leaves. It's a one-way street powered by the remarkable process of transpiration, where water evaporates from the leaves and pulls more up from below, almost like sipping through a straw made of living tissue. The phloem, on the other hand, is more like a two-way street. It transports sugars and other organic molecules created during photosynthesis down from the leaves to the rest of the plant. This allows nutrients to be delivered to the growing tips, storage organs, and roots. Think of it as the plant's postal service, quietly shuttling energy around to wherever it's needed most. But the stars of the show are arguably the leaves. Leaves are marvels of natural engineering. They're designed to capture sunlight, absorb carbon dioxide from the air, and produce glucose through the process of photosynthesis. Their flat, broad surfaces maximize exposure to sunlight, while tiny pores on their undersides, called stomata, allow gases to enter and exit in a tightly regulated exchange. These stomata can open and close depending on conditions like humidity, temperature, and carbon dioxide levels, helping the plant conserve water while still breathing. Inside the leaf, chloroplasts, those little green organelles, work tirelessly. They contain chlorophyll, the pigment that gives plants their green color and captures energy from sunlight. With sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, the chloroplasts perform photosynthesis, converting light energy into chemical energy that powers the entire plant and incidentally produces oxygen as a byproduct, something the rest of us are quite grateful for. If you look closely at the shape and structure of leaves across different plant species, you'll see an incredible variety of forms, each adapted to its environment. Needles on conifers like pine trees reduce surface area to conserve water in cold, dry climates. Broad banana leaves capture maximum light in tropical jungles. The fleshy leaves of succulents store water in arid deserts. Each shape tells a story about the environment in which the plant lives and how it has solved the puzzle of staying alive there. And this architecture isn't static. Plants are capable of something called phenotypic plasticity, which is a fancy way of saying they can adjust their body form in response to their surroundings. A single species of plant might grow tall and leggy in the shade, or short and bushy in full sun depending on how much light it gets. Roots will grow deeper in dry soil or spread wide when nutrients are scarce. These aren't conscious choices, of course, but they're far from random. It's all part of a finely tuned feedback loop between the plant and its environment. Some plants have evolved especially unusual body parts for very specific purposes. Take tendrils, for instance, the thin spiral structures on climbing plants like peas or grapes. These act like plant fingers wrapping around supports and helping the plant reach upward toward the light, or consider the thorns on a rose bush or the spines of a cactus. These are modified leaves or stems that serve a defensive purpose, keeping would-be grazers at bay. And then there are tubers and bulbs, underground storage units. A potato, for example, is a swollen underground stem packed with energy reserves. It may not look like much, but it's a sophisticated survival tool, allowing the plant to endure tough seasons and grow again when the time is right. Onions, garlic, and tulips use similar strategies, storing energy in bulbs for a rainy day, or rather a sunny spring. Of course, no discussion of plant bodies would be complete without mentioning flowers. These reproductive structures are as practical as they are beautiful. Petals, often brightly colored and aromatic, are designed to attract pollinators, bees, birds, bats, beetles, even the occasional wind gust. Inside the flower, pollen is produced and transferred to other plants to allow fertilization, which leads to the formation of seeds and fruit. Fruit, biologically speaking, is simply a mature ovary. But evolution has dressed it up in all sorts of appealing ways to encourage animals, including humans, to help disperse seeds. From the sticky burrs that cling to your socks to the juicy berries we snack on, plants have developed countless strategies to send their next generation out into the world. Even within a single plant's lifetime, there's an immense amount of flexibility and subtlety in how its body develops. Many plants exhibit what's called indeterminate growth, meaning they can continue to grow as long as conditions allow. Unlike animals whose body plans are largely fixed after a certain age, plants keep building new structures, new leaves, new stems, new roots throughout their lives, and they do it all with a kind of quiet elegance. No nerves, no muscles, no central brain. Just a network of cells communicating chemically and physically, adapting to the world with slow, deliberate changes. If you speed up time, say through a time-lapse camera, the full choreography becomes visible. You'd see leaves turning to follow the sun, roots weaving through the earth, flowers opening with a slow-motion sigh. It's a silent symphony of motion just played in a different key, so while a plant might not wag its tail or come when called, it's very much alive. Its body is busy sensing, building, and balancing, using a toolkit refined over hundreds of millions of years. In many ways, the plant body is an engineer's dream, self-building, solar-powered, and able to recycle its own parts. It can filter air, anchor soil, make sugar out of sunlight, and create its own food without ever leaving the house. And perhaps most wonderfully, it does all of this without needing to be in a hurry. There's no rush, no panic, just a steady reaching for the sun, a slow stretching of cells, and a calm, quiet confidence in being exactly where it needs to be. Now, that's a body worth appreciating. If you've ever looked at a potted plant and thought, well, it's nice, but it's not exactly thinking about anything, you're not alone. For centuries, plants were seen as little more than passive green machines, sunlight in, oxygen out, and not much going on in between. But recent research has been quietly shaking up that perception. It turns out that plants are far more aware of their surroundings than we once believed. They don't have brains or nervous systems like animals do, but they can sense, respond, remember, and even make decisions in ways that challenge our traditional ideas of intelligence. Let's start with a word that tends to raise eyebrows: plant intelligence. It sounds like the title of a children's science fiction novel, but it's actually a serious field of study. Researchers have been exploring whether plants possess something akin to a distributed intelligence, a system of information processing spread throughout their tissues rather than centralized in a brain. This doesn't mean that one of the first clues to this came from experiments with climbing plants. Let's take the humble pea plant. When grown near a support, like a stick or a pole, the plant will send out tendrils and begin to curl toward it. That's no surprise. It's what climbing plants do. But researchers noticed something more subtle. If they moved the support, the plant adjusted its growth pattern. And if two supports were offered, one short and close, one tall and far, the plant seemed to evaluate both options before committing, often choosing the one that offered the best long-term support. This isn't just automatic reflex, it's conditional behavior based on assessment. But how exactly does a plant make a decision without a brain? Well, plants use complex biochemical networks to process information. They have hormones that act as messengers, signaling molecules that travel through their tissues, and even electrical impulses that move from cell to cell. In fact, some plants have been shown to transmit electrical signals at speeds similar to those found in animal nerves, albeit without actual neurons. One famous example involves the mimosa plant. Mimosa pudica, sometimes known as the sensitive plant because of its dramatic response to touch. If you gently tap one of its leaves, it folds up almost instantly, a kind of botanical flinch. Scientists once thought this was just a mechanical reaction, but in a series of clever experiments, researchers dropped mimosa plants from a short height repeatedly without causing physical damage. At first, the plants folded their leaves in response as expected, but over time they stopped reacting. They had learned that the drop wasn't harmful, and they stopped wasting energy on unnecessary responses. What's more, they retained this memory for several weeks. The plants had essentially remembered an experience and adjusted their behavior accordingly. This kind of habituation, a decrease in response to a repeated harmless stimulus, is a basic form of learning, and yet it occurred in an organism with no brain, no neurons, and no traditional memory centers. Another intriguing example comes from experiments with maze-like environments. In one study, scientists placed plants in a Y-shaped chamber with a light source at one end. The plants consistently grew toward the light, as you'd expect, but then the light was removed and replaced with a fan. The fan alone doesn't benefit the plant, but during training it had been paired with the light. And now, in the absence of the light, the plant still grew toward the fan. In other words, the plant had learned to associate the fan with the light, a process strikingly similar to classical conditioning in animals. Now, before we start awarding honorary diplomas to philodendrons, let's be clear. Plant intelligence is different from animal intelligence. Plants don't have consciousness in the way we do. They don't have internal narratives, self-awareness, or little green thoughts floating through their imaginary minds. What they do have is an incredible ability to sense, analyze, and react to their surroundings, all using systems entirely their own. One of those systems is chemical communication. Plants are masters of chemical messaging. They release compounds into the air and the soil, often in astonishingly specific ways. If a leaf is chewed on by an insect, the plant can release airborne chemicals that signal other parts of the same plant and even neighboring plants to prepare for attack. These warning signals can trigger the production of bitter or toxic compounds that make the leaves less tasty to would-be grazers. In some species, the signal is so specific that it can identify the type of attacker. A tomato plant being nibbled by caterpillars, for instance, will produce different chemicals than one being poked by aphids. These chemical warnings aren't just random distress calls. They're targeted messages shaped by millions of years of evolutionary arms races. But perhaps even more impressive is how plants can decide how to allocate their resources. Imagine you're a sunflower growing in a crowded field. To your left, there's shade. To your right, there's more sunlight, but also a taller plant. You can't move from your spot, but you can adjust your growth. So, you lean slightly toward the light, stretch your stem to rise above your neighbor, and reroute energy from root growth to support your towering ambition. These decisions aren't made by a tiny green executive somewhere inside the stalk. They're the result of decentralized feedback systems. Chemical signals that say there's more light over here, or the soil's a bit dry over there, and the plant's tissues respond accordingly. It's less like a brain making choices and more like 1,000 tiny sensors adjusting the sails on a very quiet ship. Even root growth is astonishingly strategic. Roots don't just grow randomly through the soil. They explore, they compare, and they remember. If a root encounters a patch of nutrient-rich soil, it branches out, maximizing absorption. If it hits a dry or toxic area, it diverts. Some studies have shown that roots can even recognize their own kin, plants of the same species, and behave less competitively when growing near them. When surrounded by strangers, they may expand more aggressively, seeking to outcompete. When surrounded by relatives, they tend to play nice. This kin recognition hints at a kind of social awareness, albeit a very different one from ours. It's not emotional, but it is responsive. Plants also respond to the presence of other plants through light detection. They can sense changes in the ratio of red to far red light, which tells them whether they're being shaded by others. If they detect too much far red light, an indicator that taller neighbors are blocking sunlight, they ramp up stem elongation in an attempt to get ahead. In this way, plants are locked in slow-motion duels with their neighbors, subtly shifting shape and strategy based on minute changes in light and chemical signals. It's not aggressive exactly, but it's definitely competitive. There's also growing evidence that plants exhibit what some researchers call anticipatory behavior. That is, they don't just react, they prepare. In fluctuating environments, some plants have been shown to anticipate the return of regular stresses like drought or grazing, and adjust their internal chemistry in advance. This isn't quite memory in the human sense, but it's memory-like. A biological record of past events that influences future behavior. This brings us to perhaps the most fascinating concept of all, distributed intelligence. Unlike animals, which rely on a central nervous system, plants process information in a decentralized way. Every root tip, every leaf cell, every growth point is both a sensor and a responder. There's no command center. Instead, intelligence is spread throughout the organism like a network. It's a bit like a democracy of cells where decisions emerge from the collective input of many parts rather than a single bossy brain. And in some ways, this makes plants incredibly resilient. If an animal's brain is damaged, the whole system can fail. But if a plant loses a branch, or even most of its body, it can often recover, regrow, and reconfigure itself. Its intelligence is not tied to any one location. It's built into the structure of its being. So the next time you pass a tree or water your houseplant, consider this. You're looking at a living system that senses, responds, evaluates, and adapts. It might not wave hello or compose a haiku, but it knows more about its world than we give it credit for. It remembers where the sun comes up. It knows when danger is near. It chooses where to grow and when to wait. Intelligence, it turns out, comes in many forms, some of them green, some of them silent, and some of them swaying gently in the breeze, outsmarting the world, one slow decision at a time. If you could shrink yourself down and slip into the soil beneath your feet, you'd find yourself in a bustling underground metropolis, one that's humming with life, filled with signals, trade routes, alliances, and even a bit of subterfuge. Despite the stillness we see above ground, the root systems of plants form vast dynamic networks that reach out, communicate, and interact with the world and with each other in surprisingly sophisticated ways. Roots are more than just thirsty tentacles searching for water. They are the plant's foundation, both physically and biologically. They anchor the organism in place, absorb nutrients, and serve as a frontline sensor array, constantly tasting the soil and reporting back. But they also interact with other roots, microorganisms, fungi, and chemicals in the soil in ways that begin to look an awful lot like social behavior. One of the most fascinating aspects of root biology is how plants work with fungi. Not just any fungi, mind you, but special ones that live in a deeply entwined partnership with plant roots. These are known as mycorrhizal fungi, and they form what's called a mutualistic symbiosis. In simpler terms, both parties benefit from the relationship. The fungi wrap themselves around, or sometimes even into the plant's roots, creating an interface through which nutrients can be exchanged. The fungi deliver hard-to-reach minerals, especially phosphorus and nitrogen, from the surrounding soil. In return, the plant pays them in sugar, glucose produced through photosynthesis in its leaves and delivered down into the roots. It's a cozy long-term trade agreement, and it's incredibly common. In fact, scientists estimate that over 90% of all land plants engage in some form of mycorrhizal relationship. Without fungi, many plants would struggle to gather enough nutrients, especially in poor soils. And without plants, the fungi were, this partnership forms the backbone of what some scientists have dubbed the Wood Wide Web. It's a vast underground communication and resource-sharing network that connects not just individual plants, but entire communities through their fungal partners. Trees and other plants can pass chemical signals and even share nutrients with their neighbors. Imagine a forest full of trees. Each one is a towering individual, but below ground their roots and fungal networks are intertwined. If one tree is attacked by insects or begins to dry out from drought, it may send warning signals through the fungal network. Nearby trees, upon receiving the alert, can prepare by boosting their own chemical defenses or closing their stomata to conserve water. It's not telepathy, it's biology. But it looks remarkably like a community looking out for its own. In some cases, this sharing goes beyond mere warnings. In nutrient-poor conditions, certain trees have been observed transferring sugars or nitrogen to other trees through these fungal connections. Sometimes the recipients are their own seedlings, which makes evolutionary sense. They're helping their genetic offspring survive. But other times, the generosity seems to extend to unrelated neighbors. Older established trees have even been shown to support young saplings that are shaded and unable to photosynthesize efficiently on their own. These generous elders are often referred to as mother trees. They tend to be large, mature individuals with vast root and fungal networks that extend through the forest floor. Their ability to support other trees may not be entirely altruistic. After all, maintaining a healthy understory can be good for the forest as a whole, and therefore good for the mother tree's own long-term success. But it certainly challenges the idea of plants as strictly self-interested loners. Not all root interactions are so harmonious, though. The underground world is just as competitive as it is cooperative. Plants growing in close quarters often compete fiercely for space, water, and nutrients. Some will even release chemical compounds into the soil to inhibit the growth of nearby rivals, a process known as allelopathy. Black walnut trees are notorious for this. Their roots exude a compound called juglone, which is toxic to many other plant species. This gives the walnut tree a competitive edge by reducing the number of rivals that can grow nearby. It's a bit like throwing shade at your neighbors, but chemically. Even among kin, the level of cooperation can vary. While some plants seem to recognize their relatives and dial down their competitive behaviors, others ramp up the rivalry if resources are scarce. It's a complex dance of competition and cooperation, with the outcome shaped by context, species, and environmental conditions. Roots are also sensory organs in their own right. They can detect gradients of water, nutrient concentrations, soil texture, pH levels, and even mechanical barriers like rocks or compacted earth. If you were to watch a root grow in time-lapse, you'd see it exploring, probing, pausing, and redirecting, almost like a curious worm feeling its way forward. This process isn't random. Roots grow toward areas of higher nutrient content and water availability, and they avoid toxic or barren zones. There's even evidence that roots can listen. In controlled experiments, scientists have exposed plants to the sound of running water without any actual water present and found that roots grow toward the sound. This suggests that plants can detect vibrations and use them to guide their growth. The mechanism isn't fully understood, but it likely involves tiny mechanoreceptors, cells that respond to pressure or movement distributed along the root surface. In some experiments, roots were also able to detect the presence of other roots nearby, even before physically touching them. They seem to respond differently, depending on whether the neighboring root belonged to the same plant, a genetic relative, or a completely unrelated individual. This suggests a level of recognition and response that's hard to dismiss as coincidence. Roots also play a central role in plant immune systems. When a pathogen is detected in the soil, the roots can mount a defense response, releasing antimicrobial compounds, altering their growth patterns, or even calling in help from beneficial microbes. Some plants maintain symbiotic relationships, not only with fungi but also with bacteria, which assist with nitrogen fixation or defense against disease. In legumes like peas and beans, special structures called root nodules house nitrogen-fixing bacteria that convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form the plant can use. It's a tidy little factory underground working full-time to keep the plant fed. This kind of biological teamwork isn't just fascinating. It's essential for ecosystems. The health of entire forests, grasslands, and even deserts often hinges on what's happening below the surface. If the root systems and their microbial partners are thriving, the plants above are more resilient to drought, disease, and environmental stress. But when these underground networks are disrupted by soil compaction, pollution, or deforestation, the entire ecosystem can falter. In agricultural settings, this understanding has led to a resurgence of interest in soil health. Farmers and gardeners are paying closer attention to how tilling, fertilizing, and pesticide use affect the underground world. Practices like crop rotation, cover cropping, and reduced tillage help preserve root networks and support beneficial fungi and bacteria. In a way, it's a return to a more respectful partnership with the soil. Recognizing that what we do above ground echoes below, the complexity of these underground networks has even inspired new technologies. Scientists and engineers are studying root systems and fungal networks as models for decentralized systems like internet architecture and robotics. After all, a network that can grow, adapt, reroute, and self-repair without any central control is a pretty compelling blueprint. But beyond the scientific implications, there's something quietly profound about knowing that under every forest path, garden bed, and city park, there's a living web of roots and fungi whispering to each other, passing notes, sharing meals, and occasionally engaging in a bit of strategic sabotage. It's a reminder that the world beneath our feet is just as alive and interconnected as the world we see above. So the next time you walk through a patch of grass or sit beneath a tree, remember you're standing on top of a vast, invisible network of relationships rooted in cooperation, rivalry, communication, and memory. It may be silent, it may be hidden, but it is never still. It's easy to think of plants as passive bystanders in the sensory world. They don't have eyes, ears, or noses, no fingers to touch with, no tongues to taste. But what if that's only because we're looking for our own senses in all the wrong places? While plants lack the organs we associate with perception, they've developed their own suite of sophisticated ways to gather information from the world around them. They can detect light, gravity, touch, temperature, moisture, and even sound. They can sense when they're being nibbled on, when their neighbors are nearby, and when the days are getting longer or shorter. In fact, plants may be some of the most observant organisms on Earth, just on a time scale and wavelength we're not used to noticing. Let's begin with sight, or at least something quite like it. While plants don't have eyes, they're extremely good at detecting light. Not just whether it's present, but how much there is, what angle it's coming from, how long it lasts, and even its color. This is thanks to a range of light-sensitive proteins that act like internal photoreceptors. One of the key players is a group of proteins called phytochromes. These molecules can detect red and far-red light, and they help plants determine the quality of the light they're receiving. Why is that useful? Well, when light passes through a canopy, the red wavelengths are absorbed by the upper leaves while the far-red wavelengths pass through. If a plant detects a higher ratio of far-red light, it knows it's being shaded by other plants, and it responds by growing taller in a bid to reach the sunlight. This is why many young plants seem to stretch toward the light if they're in crowded conditions, a phenomenon known as shade avoidance. They're not just growing randomly, they're interpreting the quality of the light and making architectural decisions accordingly. Plants also use other photoreceptors like cryptochromes and phototropins to detect blue light, which helps regulate everything from seedling development to stomatal opening to leaf positioning. That's right. Leaves adjust themselves to optimize exposure to sunlight. In some species, they even track the movement of the sun across the sky in a process called heliotropism. Imagine a sunflower's face slowly turning east to west following the golden arc of the sun. It's not just for dramatic effect. It's a very real solar tracking strategy to maximize photosynthesis. Then there's the question of circadian rhythms. Just like humans and animals, plants have internal clocks that run on roughly 24-hour cycles. These circadian rhythms allow them to anticipate changes in the environment, such as sunrise and sunset, even when kept in total darkness. Plants continue to follow these rhythms for several days, suggesting that their sense of time is deeply ingrained. These internal clocks help regulate processes like leaf movement, flower opening, and hormone production. For example, some plants open their flowers at specific times of day to align with the activity patterns of their preferred pollinators. Others close their stomata at night to conserve water when photosynthesis isn't taking place. It's a quiet, invisible rhythm, but it governs much of a plant's daily life. Now let's talk about touch. While plants can't reach out and feel things the way we can, they're highly sensitive to physical contact. This ability is known as thigmotropism. You can see it in action when a vine wraps itself around a trellis, or when a tendril curls after brushing against a surface. The speed and direction of this movement vary depending on the species and the stimulus, but the underlying mechanism is the same. Mechanical stimulation triggers a cascade of biochemical signals that cause cells on one side of the structure to grow faster than the other, creating a bend. Perhaps the most famous example of touch sensitivity in plants is the mimosa. Mimosa pudica. If you brush against its leaves, they fold inward almost instantly. This rapid movement is driven by changes in turgor pressure, the pressure of water inside plant cells. Specialized cells at the base of the leaflet suddenly lose water, causing them to collapse and the leaf to fold. This reaction may help deter herbivores or shake off small insects, and the plant can recover and reopen its leaves within minutes. Some carnivorous plants also respond quickly to touch. The Venus flytrap, for instance, has tiny trigger hairs on the inside of its leaf lobes. When an unsuspecting insect brushes against these hairs twice, within about 20 seconds, the trap snaps shut. This is a form of mechanosensation, and it's surprisingly precise. The plant doesn't waste energy on false alarms. Only a genuine repeated touch will activate the trap. But touch isn't the only way plants detect movement. There's emerging evidence that plants can also sense sound. Yes, sound. While they don't have ears, they can respond to vibrations in the air and soil. In laboratory studies, roots have been shown to grow toward the sound of running water, even when no moisture is present. Other studies suggest that plants can distinguish between different frequencies of sound and alter their growth or chemical production in response. This might sound like science fiction, but the logic is grounded in physics. Sound is just vibration, and plants are full of mechanoreceptors that can detect pressure changes. Some researchers believe this sensitivity could help plants locate underground water sources or respond to the chewing sounds of herbivores. Imagine a leaf quietly listening for the tiny crunch of caterpillar jaws. Speaking of chewed leaves, that brings us to one of the most remarkable ways plants sense their environment: chemical detection. Plants are constantly sampling the air and the soil for chemical cues. They release volatile organic compounds, small molecules that float through the air, and detect them through their own receptors. When one plant is attacked by a herbivore, it often releases a cloud of warning chemicals into the air. Nearby plants, upon detecting these signals, begin to ramp up their own defenses by producing bitter compounds, thickening their leaves, or even summoning predatory insects that feed on the attackers. There's a kind of chemical gossip, danger, aphids at table 2. This eavesdropping can happen between plants of the same species, or between entirely different species. Some plants are even selective about who they listen to. Studies have shown that sagebrush plants are more likely to respond to chemical signals from genetically related individuals than from strangers. Others, like tobacco plants, seem to respond more effectively to local dialects of chemical language than to foreign ones. And these responses aren't just defensive. Some plants can detect the presence of neighboring plants before they touch or shade each other, simply by detecting the chemicals released by nearby roots. They might then alter their own root architecture, adjust their growth direction, or change how they allocate resources between stems and leaves. It's a subtle but strategic form of communication, like politely stepping aside before someone else reaches for the same cup of tea. Gravity is another cue that plants are constantly monitoring. This is known as gravitropism. Roots typically grow downward, guided by gravity, while shoots grow upward. Inside the plant cells are tiny structures called statoliths, little starch-filled organelles that settle in response to gravity, providing a directional signal. If you tilt a potted plant on its side, it won't stay that way for long. Within hours or days, the stem will curve upward again. correcting its orientation. Some plants use this ability in quite creative ways. For example, certain seeds that fall to the ground in awkward positions can reorient themselves as they sprout. They feel which way is down and adjust their early growth to ensure that roots go underground and shoots head skyward. It's all part of their instinctive programming shaped by millions of years of trial and error. Plants also sense moisture with great precision. Roots can grow toward areas of higher water concentration, a behavior known as hydrotropism. This makes perfect sense. A root that can find water is a root that keeps the plant alive. But what's astonishing is how accurately roots can detect tiny gradients in moisture. Sometimes just a few % different from one side of a root tip to another. They're like living divining rods, tuning in to the subtle whispers of damp soil. Even temperature doesn't escape the plant's attention. Many plants require a period of cold before they will flower, a process known as vernalization. It's nature's way of ensuring that flowering doesn't happen too early when frost might still be a threat. Some seeds also use temperature cues to determine when to germinate. Others rely on a combination of temperature, moisture, and light to break dormancy, ensuring that they sprout only when conditions are just right. Altogether, this suite of senses gives plants a remarkably detailed picture of their environment. They may not see with eyes or hear with ears or sniff with noses, but they sense the world with a quiet, distributed intelligence that rivals many animals in sensitivity and nuance. It's not the kind of perception that leads to emotion or memory as we know it, but it is an awareness, a steady, silent monitoring of the world that informs every twitch of a tendril, every curl of a root, every unfurling of a leaf. So the next time you walk past a row of trees or tend to your houseplants, know this: they are not unaware. They're paying attention to the light, the air, the touch of the wind, the moisture in the soil, and maybe even the subtle sound of your footsteps. They are rooted in place but not disconnected. They are still but not silent, and they are listening always in their own green and patient way. There's something magical about watching sunlight spill through leaves on a quiet morning. It feels serene, timeless, like the world is quietly recharging. And in a way, it is. Every beam of sunlight that lands on a leaf is more than just light. It's energy, pure and potent, ready to be transformed. The alchemy that plants perform with this sunlight is one of the most elegant and essential processes on Earth. It's called photosynthesis, and it's the reason you, me, whales, hummingbirds, hedgehogs, and donuts all exist. At its core, photosynthesis is how plants turn light energy into chemical energy. They take sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide and use them to create glucose, a sugar molecule that powers just about everything they do. In the process, they release oxygen, which is incredibly generous of them and rather fortunate for the rest of us. Let's look at how this happens. The main actors in this solar-powered drama are the chloroplasts, tiny green organelles inside plant cells. These chloroplasts are filled with chlorophyll, the pigment that gives plants their green color and the molecule responsible for capturing light energy. Chlorophyll is incredibly good at absorbing the red and blue parts of the light spectrum while mostly reflecting green light, which is why plants appear green to us. Now, chloroplasts don't just absorb sunlight for fun. When chlorophyll captures light energy, it excites electrons within the molecule, giving them enough energy to hop onto a chain of proteins known as the electron transport chain. Think of it as a tiny high-speed assembly line inside each chloroplast, buzzing with charged particles and clever chemical tricks. There are two main stages to photosynthesis. The first is the light-dependent reactions, which, as the name suggests, require light. These reactions take place in the thylakoid membranes of the chloroplast, which are like little stacks of green pancakes. When chlorophyll absorbs sunlight, it uses that energy to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen is released as a byproduct, floating up through the leaf and eventually out into the air, where it becomes part of your next deep breath. The hydrogen, meanwhile, sticks around in the form of high-energy molecules like ATP and NADH, which are sort of like the plant's rechargeable batteries. The second stage is called the Calvin cycle, or the light-independent reactions. Despite the name, these don't necessarily happen in the dark. They just don't need light to proceed directly. This part of the process takes place in the stroma, the fluid-filled space around the thylakoid stacks. Here, The plant uses carbon dioxide from the air and the energy from its little ATP and NADPH batteries to build glucose molecules. And glucose, dear listener, is where the real magic lies. Glucose is the starting point for just about everything the plant needs. It can be used right away for energy, stored for later in the form of starch, or turned into cellulose to build cell walls. It's like a universal building block made from sunshine and air. This process, pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and converting it into energy-rich sugars, is the foundation of nearly every food chain on Earth. Herbivores eat the plants, carnivores eat the herbivores, and everything ultimately depends on that quiet chloroplast-powered miracle happening inside a leaf. Now, as simple and elegant as photosynthesis seems, it's also astonishingly efficient and complex. A single large tree might have hundreds of thousands of leaves, each one covered in millions of chloroplasts. Each chloroplast packed with stacks of thylakoids. It's a solar farm on a microscopic scale, humming away without wires, screens, or the need for a plug. But plants aren't just passive solar panels. They adjust their photosynthesis depending on conditions. In bright light, they ramp up production. In shade, they slow down. In dry conditions, they might close their stomata, the tiny pores on their leaves, to conserve water, even if that means reducing the intake of carbon dioxide and lowering their photosynthetic output. It's a constant balancing act between energy gain and water loss. Some plants, particularly those in hot and arid environments, have evolved clever variations of the standard photosynthetic process. Most plants follow a method called C3 photosynthesis, named after the 3-carbon compound it produces first. But in hotter climates where water is scarce and temperatures soar, C3 photosynthesis can become inefficient. The enzyme responsible for grabbing carbon dioxide, called rubisco, gets a bit confused in high temperatures and starts picking up oxygen instead, which wastes energy. To solve this problem, some plants have developed a different approach called C4 photosynthesis. These plants, which include corn and sugarcane, physically separate the stages of carbon fixation and sugar production into different types of cells. This allows them to concentrate carbon dioxide where it's needed and minimize the wasteful side reactions. It's like organizing your kitchen so that the cooking and prep stations are in different rooms. Inefficient in your home perhaps, but incredibly effective for managing heat and humidity. And then there are CAM plants like cacti and pineapples. These plants only open their stomata at night when the air is cooler and more humid. They take in carbon dioxide and store it in a special form until daylight returns, at which point they resume photosynthesis while keeping their stomata tightly closed. It's a brilliant strategy for saving water while still getting the job done. And it's a big reason why succulents are so good at surviving in harsh, dry places. Photosynthesis doesn't just support plants, it shapes the entire planet. Over the last few billion years, it has transformed Earth's atmosphere. Early Earth had almost no oxygen. It was the rise of photosynthetic organisms, particularly cyanobacteria, that began pumping oxygen into the air. This led to what scientists call the Great Oxygenation Event around 2 billion years ago, which drastically changed the planet's chemistry and made aerobic life, including us, possible. In a very real sense, the oxygen in every breath you take is a gift from photosynthesis. And not just from plants. Algae and photosynthetic plankton in the oceans play a massive role too. Tiny as they are, these aquatic organisms produce roughly half of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. That's right. Every other breath you take comes from the sea. Photosynthesis also plays a crucial role in climate regulation. By pulling carbon dioxide from the air, plants help reduce greenhouse gases and moderate global temperatures. Forests, wetlands, and grasslands act as carbon sinks, locking away carbon in their biomass and in the soil. When we cut down forests or burn fossil fuels, we release that stored carbon back into the atmosphere, tipping the balance. This has made photosynthesis a hot topic figuratively and literally in climate science. Understanding how plants respond to increased carbon dioxide, rising temperatures, and shifting rainfall patterns is essential for predicting how ecosystems will change in the future. It's also why planting trees and protecting natural habitats has become such an important strategy in efforts to combat climate change. But beyond the science and the numbers, there's something deeply beautiful about photosynthesis. It's a quiet, constant miracle. The leaf doesn't boast, the tree doesn't brag, But moment by moment, day by day, plants are capturing sunlight, making sugar, releasing oxygen, and keeping the whole show running. Even in urban environments, photosynthesis is quietly at work on balconies, in parks, in rooftop gardens, and cracks in the pavement where weeds take root and reach for the light. Every patch of green is a tiny solar engine humming along, keeping the planet habitable and the air fresh. And perhaps most poetic of all is the idea that sunlight, which we can't eat or drink or breathe, is transformed by plants into something we can use. They catch what we cannot hold and turn it into fuel for life. Glucose in an apple, starch in a potato, oxygen in your lungs, all made possible by the silent, invisible labor of leaves. So the next time you sit in a patch of dappled sunlight, or notice the way a tree gently sways in the breeze, take a moment to thank the humble chloroplast. It's a tiny factory that never clocks out, a solar-powered chemist that makes life possible one photon at a time. Photosynthesis is not just a process, it's a promise that even in stillness, even in silence, something vital and vibrant is always at work. The leaves know how to turn light into life, and they've been doing it for over 3 billion years. Not a bad track record for something we usually walk right past without a second thought. Imagine being a plant. You can't run, you can't hide, and your day job involves standing in one place while all sorts of things nibble, bump, or shade you. And yet somehow you survive. Not only that, you thrive. One of the ways plants manage this is through a kind of slow-motion behavior that, while almost imperceptible to us in real time, reveals a world of movement, strategy, and even communication when sped up. This is the drama of growth, of bending, reaching, curling, and unfurling. And it's all powered by something deceptively simple: plant hormones. Just like animals use hormones to regulate growth, development, and behavior, plants rely on their own internal chemical messengers. These substances help plants respond to light, gravity, touch, injury, competition, and countless other environmental signals. But instead of circulating through a bloodstream, plant hormones move through sap, cell membranes, and the spaces between cells, triggering changes as they go. One of the most famous plant hormones is auxin. If plant hormones were a pop band, auxin would be the lead singer, the one with the big hair and the spotlight. Auxin plays a central role in coordinating growth and is especially important in phototropism, which is the tendency of plants to grow toward light. You've probably seen this in action when a houseplant leans dramatically toward a window, as if trying to escape the living room altogether. Here's how it works. Auxin is produced in the tips of growing shoots. When light shines on one side of the plant, auxin redistributes itself to the shaded side. This imbalance causes the cells on the darker side to elongate more than those on the light side, making the plant bend toward the light source. It's a subtle adjustment, but over time it adds up to a very deliberate lean. Auxin also helps guide root growth. Roots respond to gravity by growing downward, a behavior called gravitropism. When a plant is tilted, auxin again shifts to one side, in this case, the lower side of the root. But here, auxin has the opposite effect. Instead of promoting cell elongation, it slows it down. This causes the upper side of the root to grow more quickly than the lower side, bending the root back toward the downward direction. It's a wonderfully simple trick using the same molecule to do opposite things depending on the tissue. Auxin is a multitasker involved not just in bending but in root formation, leaf arrangement, fruit development, and even wound healing. But auxin doesn't act alone. Plants have a whole cast of hormonal characters. One of them is gibberellin, which sounds like a character from a fantasy novel, but is in fact a powerful growth promoter. Gibberellins help elongate stems, break seed dormancy, and trigger flowering. If auxin is the plant's architect, gibberellins are the contractors, pushing the design upward and outward. Then there are cytokinins, which promote cell division. These hormones work in tandem with auxin, but they often play a counterbalancing role. While auxin encourages root growth, cytokinins encourage shoot growth. The ratio between the two can determine whether a plant puts more energy into growing up or digging down. In a way, it's like internal budgeting. Should we build more leaves or more roots this season? The answer depends on the plant's needs and the environment it's growing in. Another major player is abscisic acid. Despite its name, which suggests it's responsible for leaf drop or abscission, this hormone is more like the plant's emergency brake. It helps the plant deal with stress, particularly drought. When water is scarce, abscisic acid signals the stomata, those tiny pores on the leaf surface, to close, reducing water loss through evaporation. It also helps seeds stay dormant during unfavorable conditions, delaying germination until the odds of survival improve. Then there's ethylene, a gaseous hormone that acts like the plant's internal clock and social cue. Ethylene helps regulate processes like fruit ripening, flower wilting, and leaf fall. If you've ever left a banana near other fruit and noticed that everything ripens faster, that's ethylene at work. Bananas release ethylene gas, which triggers ripening in nearby produce. It's such a powerful effect that commercial growers often use controlled ethylene exposure to ripen fruit in warehouses before it hits the shelves. Ethylene also plays a role in how plants respond to mechanical stress. When a seedling pushes through the soil and hits resistance, it releases ethylene to modify its growth pattern. Instead of growing tall and slender, which could lead to breakage, it thickens its stem and slows its upward growth, giving it a sturdier build. It's like hitting the gym for some strength training before heading out into the world. These hormones don't act in isolation. They're in constant dialogue, modulating and balancing each other's effects based on the plant's internal needs and external circumstances. It's not a top-down command system, but a fluid, decentralized coordination of signals, more like a jazz band improvising together than a military parade. All of this hormonal chatter results in the many graceful movements we associate with plants. The way a sunflower turns its face toward the morning sun. The way a vine sends out a searching tendril and curls around a fence post. The way leaves droop in the heat of the day and perk up again by evening. These movements, known collectively as tropisms and nastic responses, are slow, subtle, and largely driven by changes in cell growth and water pressure. In phototropism and gravitropism, as we've seen, the plant grows toward or away from a stimulus. But in nastic movements, the response is independent of the direction of the stimulus. For example, the sensitive plant Mimosa pudica folds its leaves inward when touched. This isn't a directional growth response. It's a quick turgor movement caused by rapid shifts in water pressure in specialized cells at the base of the leaflets. The result is dramatic and oddly charming, like a bashful leaf pulling a curtain. Some flowers also exhibit nastic movements. Morning glories unfurl in the early light, while others close their petals at dusk. These opening and closing behaviors are often regulated by circadian rhythms, light cues, and temperature, all tied to the plant's internal clock and hormonal state. Even seed germination is a carefully orchestrated performance. When a seed senses the right combination of moisture, temperature, and sometimes light, it begins to awaken. Hormones like gibberellin and abscisic acid play tug-of-war, determining whether the seed should stay dormant or break through its coat and begin to grow. When gibberellin wins the match, enzymes are activated that soften the seed coat and mobilize stored food reserves, allowing the embryonic root to emerge and seek the soil. As the seedling grows, its tiny root and shoot tips begin their own hormonal negotiations, adjusting their paths in response to the environment. Roots grow toward moisture and nutrients. Shoots reach for light, leaves unfold, chloroplasts rev up, and the whole machinery of photosynthesis comes online. It's the quiet birth of a new green life, choreographed entirely by chemical whispers. And if you think all this growth is mindless or automatic, consider the incredible precision with which plants adjust to changing conditions. A tree growing on a windy hillside will develop thicker bark and stronger branches on the windward side. A plant shaded by a taller neighbor may redirect its energy to lateral growth, finding gaps in the canopy. Even the angle of a leaf can change slightly throughout the day to maximize light capture and minimize water loss. These aren't random changes. They're fine-tuned responses guided by hormones and carried out with incredible elegance. Time-lapse photography has helped us see these movements more clearly. Speed up a plant's life, and it becomes a dancer, bending toward the sun, unfurling new leaves, twirling vines, and even swaying in response to unseen signals. It's a reminder that just because something moves slowly doesn't mean it's not moving at all. Plants are in constant motion, just on their own terms, and perhaps that's the most beautiful part. In a world that prizes speed, plants invite us to slow down, to notice the curve of a stem, the patience of a bud waiting to bloom, the way a leaf catches the light. Their growth is both a science and a kind of quiet poetry written in hormones and cells, unfolding inch by inch in the stillness. So next time you pass by a tree or water your favorite houseplant, take a moment to appreciate the invisible orchestration at play. Every twist of a vine, every stretch toward the sun, every curling petal or drooping leaf is the result of a careful hormone-driven conversation happening just beneath the surface. It's the secret choreography of life itself. Slow, steady, and utterly extraordinary. Plants may not have cell phones or the internet, but that hasn't stopped them from becoming excellent communicators. In fact, plants have been passing messages for hundreds of millions of years, quietly, efficiently, and often without anyone noticing. Their methods are subtle, but surprisingly complex, involving an arsenal of chemical compounds, a flair for timing, and even a bit of strategic deception. It's not gossip in the traditional sense, but it's communication all the same. Warning signals, distress calls, recruitment posters for insect allies, and occasionally some sneaky manipulation of the local wildlife. Let's start with one of the clearest examples of plant communication: chemical warnings. When a plant is under attack, say by a hungry caterpillar, it doesn't just suffer in silence, it responds by releasing volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, into the air. These are tiny airborne chemicals that drift out from the injured leaves and spread through the surrounding area. To us, they might carry a faint grassy smell or the scent of freshly broken greenery. But to other plants nearby, they're the equivalent of an emergency broadcast system. Neighboring plants, upon detecting these VOCs, begin to ramp up their own defenses. They might produce bitter or toxic compounds that make them less palatable to herbivores or thicken their leaves to make chewing more difficult. This response can happen within minutes of receiving the signal. It's not magic, it's biochemistry, and it works remarkably well. One classic example comes from wild tobacco plants. When a tobacco plant is attacked by caterpillars, it releases a specific blend of VOCs that not only warns nearby tobacco plants, but also attracts predatory insects like parasitic wasps. These wasps are natural enemies of the caterpillars, and they follow the chemical trail straight to the buffet. The plant, in effect, has called in air support. But here's where things get even more interesting. The chemical messages plants send are often highly specific. A tobacco plant being eaten by caterpillars will produce a different chemical signal than one attacked by beetles. Some plants can even distinguish between mechanical damage, like a broken leaf, and biological attack. Simply snipping a leaf with scissors won't trigger the same chemical cascade as actual herbivory, because the enzymes in insect saliva are part of what triggers the plant's alarm system. In other words, plants can tell the difference between an accident and an attack. There's also evidence that these warning signals aren't just one-way broadcasts, they're part of a broader conversation. Some plants seem to respond more strongly to distress signals from close relatives than from unrelated neighbors. Others may choose not to respond at all if the perceived threat is minimal. It's a system with nuance, not just a one-size-fits-all panic button. This kind of airborne signaling is called plant-to-plant communication, and it's been observed in many species from corn and beans to maple trees and sagebrush. But communication doesn't stop at the air. Roots can send chemical messages through the soil, often using fungal networks as conduits. This below-ground signaling allows plants to coordinate responses across longer distances and maintain social ties with neighbors, sort of like a root-level social media platform. Some researchers believe that plants might even be capable of priming each other. In other words, a plant that has been exposed to stress, like drought or pest attack, may send out signals that prepare nearby plants for the same conditions, making them more resilient when the stress eventually arrives. It's like someone handing you an umbrella just before it starts to rain. Communication isn't always about danger, though. Plants also use chemical cues to attract allies. One of the best-known examples is in the realm of pollination. Flowers are essentially botanical billboards advertising themselves to pollinators with bright colors, alluring shapes, and irresistible scents. The chemicals involved in floral scent are incredibly diverse. Hundreds of different volatile compounds that vary not just by species but by time of day, stage of bloom, and even weather conditions. Many flowers produce more scent in the evening, targeting nocturnal pollinators like moths. Others sync their fragrance to the busiest hours of bees or butterflies. Some even change their scent after pollination to let potential visitors know the buffet is closed. It's a remarkably efficient system. Chemical advertising with real-time updates, but plants can go a step further. Some flowers don't just attract insects, they manipulate them. The orchid family, for instance, includes a number of species that use chemical mimicry to lure pollinators. One of the most famous examples is the bee orchid, which produces a flower that looks and smells like a female bee. Male bees, tricked by this botanical impersonation, attempt to mate with the flower, a behavior charmingly known as pseudocopulation. In the process, they pick up pollen and carry it to the next deceiving bloom. It's not very fair to the bee, but it gets the job done. Some plants even engage in cross-species recruitment by calling in bodyguards. When attacked by herbivores, certain species release VOCs that attract predatory insects. Not just parasitic wasps, but also ladybugs, lacewings, or predatory mites. These allies then feed on the attackers, providing the plant with a natural form of pest control. It's like outsourcing your security system to the local insect population. Of course, not all plant communication is quite so altruistic. Some plants use chemical warfare to sabotage their neighbors. This is known as allelopathy, and it involves releasing compounds into the air or soil that inhibit the growth of competing plants. Black walnut trees are infamous for this. Their roots secrete a compound called juglone, which is toxic to many other plant species. By chemically sterilizing the soil around them, walnut trees reduce competition and carve out a little extra breathing room. Even crop plants can get in on the action. Wheat and rice, for instance, produce chemicals that suppress the germination of nearby weed seeds. It's a sort of botanical turf war, and it plays out silently every day, in fields, forests, and backyards across the globe. Some plants may also eavesdrop on their neighbors. A plant that detects VOCs from a wounded neighbor might start boosting its own defenses even if it hasn't been attacked yet. This kind of anticipatory behavior can be extremely beneficial in dense plant communities where the fate of one often predicts the fate of many. It's a little like noticing your neighbor putting up storm shutters and deciding to check the weather forecast. Chemical communication is so effective and widespread that researchers have started exploring ways to use it in agriculture. By mimicking the warning signals plants naturally produce, it may be possible to create treatments that help crops defend themselves without the need for synthetic pesticides. Imagine spraying a field not with chemicals to kill insects, but with a scent that tells the plants, "Get ready. Something's coming." There are also efforts to breed or engineer crops that are better at attracting beneficial insects through scent. By enhancing these natural communication channels, we might be able to create healthier, more resilient agricultural systems that work with nature rather than against it. Even the timing of these chemical messages is important. Plants are incredibly sensitive to circadian rhythms, and their communication patterns often follow a daily schedule. Some defenses are stronger in the morning, when herbivores are most active. Some floral scents peak in the late afternoon, aligning with pollinator visits. Others ramp up at night, calling in nocturnal allies or preparing for cooler temperatures. In this way, plants don't just talk, they listen. They respond to cues from the environment, from each other, and from the many insects, microbes, and animals that share their world. It's not communication in the human sense. There are no thoughts or feelings involved, but it is remarkably sophisticated, and perhaps most impressively, it's been going on for eons. Long before humans developed language, long before birds sang or wolves howled, plants were talking. They were sending signals, adjusting their chemistry, recruiting allies, and sometimes sabotaging their rivals. The forest was alive with messages. We just didn't know how to hear them. Now, with the help of modern science, we're starting to tune in. We're learning to decipher the language of leaves to understand what plants are saying with their scents, their roots, their blooms, and their invisible emissions. It's a quiet conversation, but one that shapes ecosystems, supports biodiversity, and quite frankly, keeps the planet running. So the next time you pass a flowering bush or step into a garden, take a moment to appreciate the chemical conversations happening all around you. There may be no shouting or singing, but the plants are whispering of danger, of allies, of opportunities and threats. and in their own slow, fragrant chemical way, they are always speaking. Plants may be rooted in place, but that doesn't mean they're helpless. In fact, when it comes to self-defense, they've got a surprisingly sophisticated playbook. Imagine being constantly surrounded by hungry mouths, from insects and snails to goats and giraffes, and yet you can't run, can't swat, can't even scream. What's a leafy life form to do? As it turns out, quite a lot. Over millions of years, plants have evolved an impressive suite of defense strategies, some physical, some chemical, and a few downright sneaky. These tactics help them ward off predators, deter grazers, and even manipulate other species into doing their dirty work. The quiet, still life of a plant is more of a slow-motion battlefield than most of us ever realize. Let's start with the most visible line of defense, physical structures. Many plants come equipped with built-in armor. Think of thorns, spines, and prickles, the botanical equivalent of barbed wire. Roses, for example, have prickles, which are sharp outgrowths from the epidermis. Cacti are famous for their spines, which are actually modified leaves. And hawthorns and blackberries come armed with long, rigid thorns, which are modified branches. These sharp features discourage animals from taking a bite or brushing too close. They're not foolproof. Some animals adapt and eat around them, but they certainly make grazing a bit less appealing. But there are softer, subtler defenses too. Many plants have a layer of fine hairs on their leaves or stems known as trichomes. These tiny projections can make the surface feel unpleasantly fuzzy, irritating, or even sticky to insects. In some species, like stinging nettles, trichomes act like hypodermic needles, injecting irritants when touched. One gentle brush against a nettle's leaves can leave you tingling, itching, or cursing softly under your breath. Still, plants don't stop at the surface. Many of their most powerful defenses are invisible until you taste them or try to. Plants produce an astonishing variety of chemical compounds specifically designed to deter herbivores. Some are bitter, some are toxic, and some mess with digestion in particularly unpleasant ways. Alkaloids are one such group. These are nitrogen-containing compounds that include some of the most familiar names in plant chemistry: caffeine, nicotine, morphine, and quinine. While humans have found all sorts of interesting uses for them, medicinal, recreational, and otherwise, plants use them primarily to make themselves unappetizing or outright dangerous to would-be grazers. Caffeine, for example, doesn't just wake up your brain. It's also toxic to many insects in high enough concentrations. Nicotine, similarly, is a powerful neurotoxin that deters insect herbivores from feasting on tobacco leaves. Then there are tannins, which you might know from tea or red wine. These compounds bind to proteins and make them harder to digest. In the plant world, that means a mouthful of leaves laced with tannins becomes a lot less nutritious and a lot more annoying for the animal chewing them. It's a gentle, persistent deterrent. The plant version of leaving sand in the sandwiches, other defenses are more direct. Cyanogenic glycosides, for example, release hydrogen cyanide when the plant tissue is damaged. This can be fatal to insects and even to larger animals if they eat enough. Some types of clover, cassava, and even apple seeds contain these compounds in small amounts. Proper preparation or cooking breaks them down in edible plants, but in the wild they act as a potent do not eat sign. And then we have glucosinolates, sulfur-containing compounds found in members of the mustard family like cabbage, broccoli, and horseradish. These create a pungent, spicy taste when the plant is chewed. To a rabbit, that hot zing might be a reason to reconsider dinner. To us, it's a condiment. Interestingly, many of the plant chemicals we now enjoy, whether as flavors, fragrances, or medicine, started off as defense mechanisms. Plants never intended to make our salads more exciting or our spice racks more colorful. They were simply trying to avoid becoming lunch. But defense in the plant kingdom isn't always about making things unpleasant. Sometimes it's about recruiting reinforcements. Plants can and do enlist help in their battles against pests, and their allies are often members of the insect world. When under attack, certain plants release volatile organic compounds that attract predatory insects to the scene. Corn, cotton, and lima beans, for instance, emit specific scents when caterpillars begin chewing on their leaves. These scents serve as a kind of chemical distress signal, summoning parasitic wasps that lay their eggs inside the caterpillars. The wasp larvae then develop inside the unsuspecting herbivores, ultimately killing them. It's a gruesome but effective way for plants to fight back. Let nature's own hit squad take care of the problem. This isn't a rare phenomenon. More than 100 plant species across multiple families have been documented calling for backup in this way. The relationship is so finely tuned that some plants can vary the chemical blend they release depending on the type of attacker. Chewing insects, piercing insects, and even mechanical damage all produce different responses. It's not just a generic alarm, it's a customized plea for very specific help. Some plants go even further by forming more permanent alliances. Acacia trees, for example, have a famously close relationship with certain species of ants. The trees produce hollow thorns where the ants can live, as well as nectar-rich food bodies just for them. In return, the ants patrol the branches, attacking any herbivores or even other plants that come too close. It's a classic room and board for security arrangement, and it benefits both parties. The ants get a safe place to live and plenty to eat. The tree gets a built-in defense force complete with jaws and stingers. In a few cases, these ant relationships become so exclusive that the ants won't leave their host tree even when offered other food sources. It's not just cooperation, it's co-evolution. Each species has shaped the other over time, resulting in a tightly woven partnership that goes far beyond casual mutualism. But not all defenses are about chemical warfare or armed guards. Some plants rely on good old-fashioned trickery. A number of species use mimicry to avoid being eaten. One of the cleverest examples is the passionflower vine, which produces little yellowish spots on its leaves that look like butterfly eggs. Since butterflies tend to avoid laying eggs on leaves that already appear occupied, partly to avoid competition and partly to escape predators, this simple visual deception can reduce the number of caterpillars the plant has to deal with. It's a botanical version of nothing to see here. Other plants play dead in a sense. When touched, they wilt or droop, making themselves look less appealing. The sensitive plant Mimosa pudica is a well-known example, folding its leaves inward when disturbed. This sudden collapse may discourage grazers or shake off small insects, and after a short recovery period, the plant perks right back up. Some plants also engage in what might be called community defense. Certain species of trees have been observed to synchronize their seed production in a phenomenon known as masting. In mast years, the trees produce an overwhelming number of seeds all at once. This sudden abundance saturates the local environment with food, making it impossible for seed predators to eat them all. As a result, a higher percentage of seeds survive and germinate. In the years between mast events, the trees produce very few seeds, keeping predator populations low. It's a long-term coordinated defense strategy on the scale of entire forests, and while many of these defenses are triggered by specific threats, some plants maintain a low-level readiness at all times. This is known as constitutive defense. It includes features like thorns, tough leaves, and baseline levels of toxic compounds. Other defenses are induced. They kick in only when the plant detects damage or stress. Induced defenses save energy, but constitutive defenses offer constant protection. Most plants use a mix of both, adjusting their strategy depending on their lifestyle and environment. There's a cost to all this, of course. Producing toxins, building armor, and signaling for help all require energy and resources that could otherwise go toward growth or reproduction. Plants have to make trade-offs. If conditions are good and predators are few, it might make sense to invest in leaves and flowers. But in rough neighborhoods full of nibblers, defense takes priority. Some plants even keep a sort of biochemical memory of past attacks, allowing them to respond more quickly if the same threat returns. It's not memory in the way humans understand it. There are no mental snapshots or emotional responses, but it is a physiological preparedness, a learned response encoded in the plant's molecular pathways. So, while it may look like a plant is just sitting there doing nothing, it's actually making strategic choices every moment. Should I toughen my leaves? Should I call for wasps? Should I invest in another flower or hold off until this beetle situation is under control? Plants may not have mouths to bite back, but that hasn't stopped them from becoming masters of survival. Their defenses are varied, adaptable, and often beautifully subtle. Whether through chemical deterrence, alliances with insects, armor, or trickery, they find ways to endure in a world full of hungry mouths. Next time you take a walk in the garden or through the woods, spare a thought for the quiet warriors around you. Every thorn, every bitter taste, every curled leaf or pungent scent tells a story not of passivity, but of resilience. Because in the plant world, staying still doesn't mean staying silent. It just means fighting smart. And so after drifting through chloroplasts and root tips, secret scents and snapping traps, Sleepy Professor finds ourselves back where we began, marveling at the silent, intricate, astonishing world of plants. What started as a simple exploration of green things has revealed something far more profound. These quiet beings, so often overlooked or reduced to decor, are among the most adaptable, essential, and fascinating life forms on Earth. They don't just survive. They shape worlds. They don't speak in words, but their language is written in sunlight, scent, movement, and memory. We've uncovered how they breathe for us, feed us, heal us, and inspire us. We've seen their cunning strategies, their hidden communication, their moments of brilliance in the darkness of night and the blaze of day. They defend themselves, outsmart predators, plan for the future, and even in their own slow way, learn from experience. They build the very ecosystems that cradle life. And now, perhaps more than ever, they hold some of the keys to humanity's path forward. So, with all of this in mind, are you still awake? If you are, Sleepy Professor hopes it's not because this was too interesting. Though if it was, well, at least you've learned a few things about your leafy roommates along the way. And if you're already halfway to dreamland, may your thoughts be filled with forests that whisper and vines that stretch slowly across starlit skies. Before you drift off completely, Sleepy Professor would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment and share. Are you surrounded by house plants, garden greenery, or maybe a cozy cactus on your nightstand? And if you found this gentle journey into the world of plants relaxing or informative, or both, please do consider giving this video a like and subscribing to Sleepy Professor. It's a small gesture that helps bring you more calming, curious content from the natural world and beyond. Thank you for joining Sleepy Professor on this journey through the secret life of plants. Sleep well, dream deep, and don't forget the world is blooming all around you quietly, patiently, beautifully. You just have to slow down to see it.